Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
All right, well, welcome to So Many Books, So Little Time. My name is Joe Nash, and I'm here with Zina, Shevchik. We are both librarians here at the library. And the premise of our show is very simple. If you've never seen it, we go down to the new bookshelf, and then we go down to our technical services department where they're processing all the new books. We've got a whole bunch of new books to tell you about. And Zina, as usual, will go first.
Hi, my first book is a big book. It's called One Big Table, A Portrait of American Cooking, 600 Recipes from the Nation's Best Home Cooks, Farmers, Fishermen, Pitmasters, and Chefs by Molly O'Neill. And it's one big book. And it's fascinating. It's a lot more than a cookbook. It is what they say. What it says, a portrait of American cooking, but it's a portrait of American life. It covers all cultures and cuisines. Most of it is not fancy cooking in the sense of going to a restaurant and getting a fancy meal. It goes from basic sauce for pizza or pasta, 7-Up ham, pork roast 2, these are the more exotic, black duck and dumplings, rooster stew, Vietnamese meatballs, smoked pheasant mole, but then it goes back to creamy grits and chard. What's different about this is that it takes up a lot of space describing the author, describing the region of the country that the recipe is coming from, the history of the cook. I was just telling Joe before we went on air that here's just 2 pages devoted to Ted Williams, the baseball player, Ted Williams Fenway Chowder, and it has a whole page describing Ted Williams' interest in cooking and how he used to cook for his teammates, and he enjoyed fooling them, saying he was going to cook one thing and he'd give them something else, but he wouldn't tell them until after what he actually had them eating. And it's got a picture of one of the baseball cards from 1957, I think it shows. I don't know much about baseball cards, but the whole book is like that. It's got plenty of pictures, graphics, posters, marketing posters for all kinds of foodstuffs, and I found it fascinating, and I'm going to take it home and read it some more. It's a lot more than a cookbook, as I said. It tells, in the middle of it, it has a whole section on the history of stoves, and that's fascinating. It has sidebars on the history of canning or the history of a particular kind of foodstuff and how it came to be used in America and cooking. So the author was a food critic, and she traversed the country for about a decade and interviewed all kinds of people and got their favorite recipes, and she asked them which recipe embodies that person's life and times and their own personal America, and if you could leave one recipe to your family, which would it be? So that's the basis of this book, and I highly recommend it. One Big Table, A Portrait of American Cooking.
Okay. Now, it's interesting you mentioned Ted Williams, Zina, because,
because
the book I'm about to talk about, my first book, in here, someone mentioned how they were at Ted Williams' house and he cooked food for them.
No.
Yes.
Oh, my goodness.
Okay. This book is called Those Guys Have All the Fun, and you can see the letters there, ESPN, the sports network, Inside the World of ESPN. This is a book that just came out this week. We're filming this. Today is June 2nd. Came out at the end of last week. And it's creating a lot of buzz. It's a gigantic book. It's over 700 pages, and I have to say, I just picked it up the other day, and before I knew it, I was on page 250. I mean, it's really, really interesting. The
Even
authors,
for non-sports people?
well, yes, the reason it's interesting is because it's really not about sports. I mean, of course, it's about ESPN, the sports network, but it's not really about sports. It's about corporate America, popular culture, television, big money, how all behind-the-scenes stuff, personalities. And of course, if you know ESPN, there's a lot of stories in here about people like Chris Berman and Keith Olbermann and some of the very first sports.
Keith Olbermann comes
Yes,
from
he was.
sports.
He was from sports. Dan
wow.
Patrick and some of the first women who were did sports. Linda Cohn, Robin Roberts, people like that. Susie Colbert. But it's really interesting. What the authors did, they conducted something like 500 interviews, and the book is basically all those people's their words, back and forth, excerpted and strung together by a little history of what was going on. But a really fascinating look into not just ESPN, but the growth of cable TV. And it's interesting. It started in 1979. There wasn't much cable, and then now they're a multi-billion-dollar business, and they got 2 or 3 networks now, and it's just really, really fascinating. All the personalities, but all the behind-the-scenes stuff, and all the money and the corporate, all the corporate stuff is very interesting, and what it takes to put on a good show, to do a whole network actually. And there's some actually, if you've been seeing the news or seeing the interview with the authors, there's some crazy stories in here too. Because when they first started, almost everyone they hired was brand new. No one even knew if they were going to be watching. There were all a lot of young kids, and they're all in their 20s, and it was pretty crazy, some of it. But if you're interested in ESPN and any of that,
Broadcasting, any
yes,
kind of broadcasting,
in broadcasting,
journalism,
and how they ended up being taken over by ABC. But it's really good. Like I say, it's reading so fast. I picked up literally a few days ago. I'm on page almost 300 already. But those guys have all the fun inside the world of ESPN. These are the authors who did put together the history of Saturday Night Live. It was called Live from New York, if you remember that book that was a while ago. So
how many women are on the cover of that?
on this book, there
I'm
are.
looking on the cover there.
There are 1, 2, 3, 4.
Oh,
There's
good.
4 women on
That's
here.
not bad.
Yeah, so
Very good.
it's good. It's really interesting. All right, Zina.
My next book is called Railway Maps of the World by Mark Ovenden, and it looks like it's a picture book for adults, and to a certain extent it is. It's a collection of the world's greatest railway maps and posters, both historical and contemporary. It covers 2 centuries. It has pictures, photos, reproductions of advertising posters, surveyors' plans, travel posters, railway station wall maps, and satellite photos. It's a lot of pictures, but there is text that covers the history, and also it tells lots of different kinds of stories about railroads. Part 1 presents visual material from beginning with the Liverpool and Manchester Railway of 1830 to the proposed high-speed networks in China today. Part 2 is, let's see, I have to read this. It's an atlas, aims to present the official current national railroad map of every country where passenger rail service is operating at the time of this book's preparation. That's fall 2010. So it's very unusual, very interesting. Certainly I know nothing about railroads or railway history. So this is a good introduction, and the librarian on our staff who collects this kind of things, books, materials, was really excited to see it. So I'm hoping that some of you might be really excited about it too. Railway Maps of the World by Mark Ovenden.
Someone who works here collects railway memorabilia?
Well, Dave collects
Okay.
this kind of thing.
Did not know that. You did a railroad book last time.
I did.
Okay.
Wow, I have a short memory.
Now my next book is, I think we have 3 or 4 copies. It's very popular. The book is checked out, so I don't have the book with me, but I made a copy of the cover. I hope you can see it. It's called Townie by Andre Dubus III. It's his memoir growing up in, I think it's Haverhill, Massachusetts. all those old mill towns right above Boston, very sort of depressed area, late 60s, early 70s. Now, Andre Dubus III, he's the author of probably one of the more famous, or popular, if that's the right word, of the Oprah books. He's the author of The House of Sand and Fog, which was made into a very successful movie.
Okay, that's why I know it.
His father was a famous writer. He was more of a writer's writer, in that he wasn't probably hugely commercially successful. And Andre Dubus, in his first book, House of Sand and Fog, surpassed him right away. But this is about his growing up in those mill towns back, like I said, and his father left him. His father left the family when he was like 8 or 9, and he really was very angry about that. He had a lot of brothers and sisters. His father didn't really support them, and it was really a hard scrabble, kind of poor, depressed area, like I said, old mill towns. And his description of sort of these declining cities and sort of inner city, inner despair, it's kind of depressing, to be quite honest. It really is. And he got involved early on with drinking and drugs, and the schools were a mess and everything. And his father, like I said, didn't really support him. But this memoir is very powerful, because I'll tell you why. He sort of got picked on as a kid a lot, so he decided one day, after getting beat up yet again, he would never let that happen to himself again. So he ended up lifting weights and learning boxing, I mean. So in case it ever happened again, he could defend himself. But as it turned out, he started enjoying getting in fights, and he started enjoying beating people up, and he started looking for situations to actually, he didn't go out and just beat people up. He looked for situations where if he saw someone in trouble or someone getting picked on, he would step in and beat the you-know-what out of them. And some of his descriptions of these fights are very disturbing. He put some people in the hospital. But all through this, he harbored all this hatred to his father, and his father was still in his life, but not really. But he was just an angry guy, and he ended up working in some mental institutions before he was a writer. But the way he describes this declining Northeast, it's very sad. But the book does end up on a positive note, because he ends up becoming pretty close with his father when he was Andre was in his 20s, early 30s. Andre Dubus, the father, was hit by a car outside of Boston, and I think he was paralyzed from the chest down or waist down, and he was in a wheelchair, and he still was a writer. But Andre Dubus III, the author of Townie, he sort of took care of him the last 10 years. He built his ramps, and him and his brother helped him out, and they really became close. So the book is sort of, it's a cliche to say it's a tale of redemption, but it really is a tale of redemption. And but it's also, I think, a story of forgiveness, not just of his father, but of his former self. And the book has really got some great descriptions of how you can both paradoxically hate and love a parent at the same time, vehemently. He really resented his father, and he really had a lot of hatred, but he was very close with him toward the end. The book is beautifully written, but I got to say, it's brutally beautiful. Like I say, the scenes of his beating up people are horrendous, but he really sort of starts realizing when he was late 20s, early 30s, he can't live like this. Of course, he went on to become a writer, and House of Sand and Fog was a big hit. So Andre Dubus III is he's pretty famous now. And this book, Townie, is getting a lot of press. And it was an excellent book. I probably read 30 to 40 books a year. It's only June, but this is probably going to be the book of the year for me anyway.
Wow.
Probably. You never know.
You never know what's coming, right?
So I'll just hold it up with Townie, Andre Dubus III.
Sounds
Zina?
like he had a lot of material to use for his art.
This is really
writing
good.
Later on.
This is very, very good.
Okay. My next, this is on a lighter note. I picked these books up because it's everything I'm not normally interested in. The one that's current, most recently written, is called Wicked Bugs, The Louse That Conquered Napoleon's Army and Other Diabolical Insects. This is by Amy Stewart. And the other book that's older is called Wicked Plants, The Weed That Killed Lincoln's Mother and Other Botanical Atrocities. These are fascinating little books. I love the feel of these books. I love the size of these books. I love the drawings. The drawings are by someone named Brioni Morrow Cribbs. And things that are creepy crawly, she doesn't, they're more along the lines of Edward Gorey, etchings.
Yeah.
I don't find them totally repulsive. They're kind of clever, and even occasionally she makes the bugs look cute. But they're fascinating little stories, all true. All true. She starts out let's see, the reviews call it darkly comical, entertaining, and informative. She says in one of the introductions that she tries to tell a story at the beginning of each chapter, which covers a different kind of bug or insect. She tries to tell a spine-tingling true story at the beginning of each chapter, and they are spine-tingling in most cases, but they're very interesting, and then she follows through with telling things that you might want to know about these insects, so their history, their characteristics, their genus, and their use, their habitats, how to get rid of them, how you can't get rid of them, where they hang out. There's a section in the middle here called 5 different responses when people have when they see insects out in nature, and that in itself is pretty hilarious. The chapters are interesting. One's called She's Just Not That Into You, Bugs of War, Curse of the Scorpion, I've Got You Under My Skin, The Ants Go Marching, The Enemy Within. It's really clever, it's really well written. I think that's what I wanted to say more than anything else, is that it's really well written, and I found it very interesting as well. Let's see, some of the chapters on the plants are Weeds of Mass Destruction, Lawn of Death, Meet the Nettles. She talks about with the plants that they think that maybe some of the hysteria having to do with the Salem witches was because of some kind of toxic fungus the girls might have been exposed to. It's one theory. She wants to make it clear that she's not a scientist or a doctor, but she's a writer who's fascinated by the natural world. In the back of this, the plants book, she has a list of gardens, poison gardens, and that people can visit. One of them is at the Cornell University, another is at the Montreal Botanical Gardens. It also has lots of information if you want to do further research, associations that cover this insects, or have to do with insects or noxious plants, websites, books. She even has a list of insectariums, I guess, where they must have bug gardens. Insectariums. So Amy Stewart, Wicked Bugs and Wicked Plants, and these are for adults. It sounds like something that young boys might be interested in, but it's cleverly written, really humorous, but very informative as well.
Very good.
Joe.
All right. Unfortunately, I'm going to have another of a downer kind of book, sort of depressing, but anyway. This book is called The Fear by Peter Goodwin. The subtitle is Robert Mugabe, I think that's how you say his name, and the Martyrdom of Zimbabwe. I have not read this book, but I've read many reviews. Peter Goodwin wrote a great memoir in 2006 called When a Crocodile Eats the Sun. It's his memoir of growing up in Zimbabwe with his parents. His parents were from the old days when it was still Rhodesia, I think. They were in 1980, Robert Mugabe took over the country. And at first he sort of was a benevolent dictator, I guess you could say. But it turns out the country really disintegrated as they got more nationalistic, and there was more of anti-colonialism was coming in, and around in the 90s, Mugabe, I think he just started having his armies. They just took over all the white farms. I think almost all of them. I don't mean they took them over. He just let them just go in and do what they wanted. So his book, When a Crocodile Eats the Sun, is about his parents' farm, the decline of Zimbabwe. But he writes beautifully about Africa, really beautifully about Africa, and his other book is great. So this book, I'm sure, is also extremely well written. But this book sort of takes place in the last 5 years, and since 2006, Zimbabwe is almost totally decimated now. It's almost at one point, in the late 70s, early 80s, even into the early 90s, it was a very successful country. It had high agricultural production and had all kinds of stuff, but now it's at the bottom of almost everything. Where the average lifespan went from like 50 or 60 down to like 34 or something. And it's a horrible situation. An overwhelming majority of people have AIDS. And it's just disintegrating into, and like I say, but Peter Goodwin's from Zimbabwe, him and his sister, and he goes back with his sister. And they're chronicling this decline, but again, a beautiful writer. I haven't read this yet, but it's, from what I've read, it's very disturbing and sad and about modern Africa and what Robert Mugabe has done to the country. And he won't give up power. He just, he says he's going to, right now he's 87. He says he's going to rule till he's 100. And he, if you read about him, he's kind of one of these crazy dictators that just...
Idi Amin?
Kind of like that. But anyway, The Fear by Peter Goodwin, it's gotten some great reviews, but a very sad situation.
Okay. I'm going to talk about on some novels. I read mystery and crime novels, and for those of you who liked, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, Stieg Larsson, the girl who played with fire, his trilogy. He's Swedish born. This is another writer, Joe Nesbo. He's, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly either. This is called The Snowman, and he is Norwegian. And I just started this, and I love it. The Scandinavian crime writers have certainly enjoyed a renaissance here in the last few years. This is just a facsimile of the cover of a book that I recently read by Henning Mankell. He wrote the Kurt Wallander series of mystery take place in Sweden as well, and it's contemporary. If maybe some of you have seen the Kurt Wallander series on PBS. I just read his newest that was published in the U.S. called The Troubled Man, and that was great too. I highly recommend that. That's checked out. And I think that there's quite a few reserves on this Joe Nesbo's The Snowman, but he's written several more, and several previous to this, and I did not know about him. So I will go back to his other novels since I am enjoying this so far. But for those of you, I just wanted to point out, for those of you who did enjoy Stieg Larsson's trilogy, that you might want to try Henning Mankell. Mankell is the last name, and this is Nesbo, Joe Nesbo, Nesbo. This is The Snowman, his latest.
Okay, Scandinavian detective crime novels are very big now.
Yes.
Okay, now I can go lighter now after the last couple of books, finally.
Good.
Here's a book I just read by Meg Wolitzer. This is a novel, actually. Now I'm doing some fiction for once. This book is called The Uncoupling by Meg Wolitzer. Her last book was The 10-Year Nap. I don't know, do you know Meg Wolitzer?
Well, I know about that book because
The 10-Year Nap?
Yeah, I do
Okay.
know about that book.
So this book, it's definitely lighter than the last couple of books I talked about, but it's kind of serious. This book is about, it's hard to say what this book is about. No, I know. It's being marketed as a modern take on Lysistrata, the famous Aristophanes comedy. Do you know that comedy?
No, I don't.
See, every show I have to
Tell
get my
me. I
question
know.
list.
You teach. I learn something every
Okay,
show.
Lysistrata is a famous play, Greek Greek comedy by Aristophanes.
Oh, okay. Now I know what you're talking about. Sorry.
All the men are off at war. I think it's
no, it was
the Peloponnesian War. In order to stop war, the women get together and, how can I say this? They deny their husbands the marriage bed. How's that
There
sound?
you go. That's it. That's very clear.
So this book is being marketed as a modern take on that. It kind of is, but not really. Although Lysistrata does play a part in this. This book is about a couple who are English teachers at a high school in New Jersey, and a new drama teacher comes in, and they're going to do the play Lysistrata. And during the course of the rehearsals and the thing, all the women in this little town, they don't necessarily go on a sex strike like in Lysistrata, but they all just decide. It's sort of like a spell comes over them. I don't say they decide. They all of a sudden have just they've had it with men, and so I don't mean in a way they don't want anything to do with them, but they're like, just enough already. And the interesting thing about the book is there's several different couples besides the main couple that she shows, and they're all in various ages and different stages of life, but the women all react the same. They're all like, no more. And the book sort of goes off from there, kind of, and then they're in the high school kids are doing the play, and it's actually got some funny scenes in it.
It sounds good.
It would make a really good movie. And then in the end, and then there's all these parts in the book when the women are thinking about their lives and sex and their marriage, et cetera, et cetera. And even the high school kids, the girls are all. So it's interesting that she shows these relationships, different kinds of relationships, the older people, the young people, the middle-aged, and this and that. So then comes to the night of the play when they're supposed to be doing Lysistrata, and this scene near the end is very funny, but it's kind of serious too. But so anyway, for some reason, I can't remember now, one of the men gets on stage and sort of interrupts the play and starts begging his girlfriend to take him back, kind of, or let me back in bed or whatever. And all of a sudden, all the men start going up on stage, and the whole town sort of has it out. It's pretty funny.
Sounds good.
And then after the play's over, I think somehow, I won't give it away, but somehow the spell is lifted, and it sort of has a happy ending. But the book is a lot about modern relationships and marriage and all that. It would be a great book for a book discussion group.
It does sound good.
But The Uncoupling by Meg Wolitzer, author of The 10-Year Nap.
The 10-Year Nap was about motherhood, so that.
Well, this is a lot about, I don't know if she's a feminist per se, but her novels do have a lot to do with women and their inner lives and their men in their lives and what dunces they are, probably. I would recommend, you would like this book.
That sounds like I would.
Okay.
Then my next book is called What's Gotten Into Us? Staying Healthy in a Toxic World by McKay Jenkins. One of the, right on the top, on the front cover, a reviewer calls it A Silent Spring by Rachel Carson for the Human Body. So the author is a journalist. I think this is really clearly written, and it offers some practical suggestions for how to avoid some of the toxins that we are exposed to every day, and particularly of concern of our children, what our children are exposed to. Now, there's a lot of books out there about our toxic world, but I have to say this grabbed me right away. The statistics are incredible that he presents just in the first few pages. But what started him investigating what he was exposed to on a daily basis was a personal crisis. As a relatively young man, he was diagnosed with an orange-sized tumor in his hip. And before he went into surgery, researchers were asking him in the hospital, were asking him all sorts of questions about what he was exposed to in his lifetime, like where he lived, what his jobs were, where he played, what he ate, all kinds of things like that. And there was nothing in his background that indicated that he was in any way exposed to anything particularly toxic. And so after the tumor was removed and it was benign, he was motivated to start investigating. As I said, what people are exposed to every day in their daily lives, and he he breaks the chapters down by the home, the lawn, what you can get in the store. Let's see, escapes me at the moment. The tap, meaning the water we drink, and the body. And it's amazing. He says that when the Titanic was discovered at the bottom of the ocean in 1992, one of the divers exclaimed that nothing on the Titanic was made of plastic. And that's 100 years ago, almost exactly. And he's pointing out that you can hardly find anything today that is not made of plastic or petroleum products. And he offers some practical suggestions, and he doesn't suggest that for us to avoid some of these toxic materials in our daily life, but he doesn't, he's not over preaching. But he does, his main point is that there have been so many new products made out of plastic and petroleum products and petroleum materials in the last few decades that our governments have not been able to keep up with being able to determine whether they're toxic to us or not, and what harm they might cause to us or our children. And he keeps emphasizing our children, our children. And that's his point, is that there's everything out there in our environment that have not been tested or evaluated. And people assume that if things that are around us or in the store are safe, and he's pointing out that they haven't been tested. So I highly recommend this book. I'm going to take it home with me and keep reading and try to take into account some of the suggestions he makes. So again, really good writing. What's gotten into us staying healthy in a toxic world?
Well, Zina, that you're telling us about that book on the day after, we're filming this on June 2nd, the day after the big news about the cell phones.
Right, the cell phones, exactly.
Okay, now here's a book getting a lot of press, getting, again, some really good reviews. It's called Malcolm X, a new biography by Manning Marable. The subtitle is A Life of Reinvention. You know, Malcolm X, one of the most fascinating, complex, multifaceted, controversial guys of the whole 20th century, second half of 20th century, and maybe the whole 20th century.
Yeah, maybe the whole.
But, and the interesting thing is, his autobiography of Malcolm X, a very famous book. It's a canon work now of so many different college
We used to have to read it.
I know. But there was, as the years have gone by, a lot of controversy about that. Not controversy, but Malcolm X died, of course, before the book was finished. Arthur Haley, author of Roots, sort of was the co-author. I mean, he was the editor, but Arthur Haley sort of had his own agenda too. He wasn't totally in Malcolm's camp, as they say. So even though the story basically is true, there were some liberties taken, there were some things added by Arthur Haley, there was a little controversy. So this is the first big biography. I think it's the first this author worked decades on it. In fact, unfortunately, the author, Manning Marable, he died the week this book came out, a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, really?
But it's really getting good reviews. It's really a good corrective to the autobiography. And like I say, Malcolm X, totally fast. I read that book too, autobiography. Fascinating guy, and this book is, again, I was skimming through it, obviously, like any good biography, it isn't just about the person, it's about the times, the place, the culture, society, the whole 50s and 60s civil rights, the whole black, the Nation of Islam movement, and all the personalities. So, again, book getting really good reviews, and like I say, a corrective, is that the right word, to the autobiography? Malcolm X. Oh, I like the subtitle, Life of Reinvention. You know, very, Malcolm X, a lot of the stuff he said in the autobiography about his younger days, very exaggerated. You know, a very American idea to reinvent yourself. So, Malcolm X.
Now, I have to say, the autobiography of Malcolm X was a very small book. That looks pretty hefty.
Yes, this is getting good reviews, though. So.
No. I'm not saying it's negative.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that I can't imagine handing that book to teenagers or college students and saying, read.
All right, so were you going to do one more?
Yes,
do
we have
more,
time?
and then I'll do one more. Yep.
This was different. This was different. I never studied anything to do with the Greeks or Romans, classic history or literature, so this caught my eye. The Ancient Guide to Modern Life by Natalie Haynes, and one of the reviews calls it a romp through some of the best known and some of the more obscure writers, thought, and stories of Greece and Rome. The author is British. She studied classics at Cambridge, but she has worked as a stand-up comedian. So it's in an entertaining way she presents ancient history. It's kind of an argument, very subtle, and I guess why people should continue to study the classics. And she makes connections between the way of life then and things we do today. And again, a very, I won't say folksy, but in a very entertaining way. Every chapter starts out in a rather humorous way, it's a collection of stories. She says a collection of some of the best stories from the ancient world. She talks about politics, law enforcement, or lack thereof, political apathy, religion, entertainment, and there's a chapter just on women, and she says that's because women were not pretty much didn't partake in public life in Roman and Greek civilizations, and so and they certainly didn't write down their thoughts then. So she has a whole chapter on women and their lives in the ancient world, and the title of that chapter is Frankly Medea, I Don't Give a Damn, and that just gives you an idea. There's another heading called There's No Place Like Rome, and she talks about daily life in Rome and the frustrations of traffic and congestion, things like that. And there's another one called No Business Like Show Business, which talks about the entertainment people put on and used in ancient times. So I actually found it I just breezed through it, but I think it's a good way maybe to introduce somebody who doesn't know anything about classic history, the history of Greek and Rome, or the literature of Greek and Rome, because it does cover some of the philosophers of that time, and so I highly recommend it. The Ancient Guide to Modern Life by Natalie Haynes.
Okay, now there are some great female characters in the Greek comedies and tragedies there.
Medea.
Besides Lysistrata, the Trojan Women, never see that. I mean, amazing play. But I'll end with this on a sort of a tribute, I guess. Last year, Robert B. Parker died, one of my all-time favorite authors. He wrote the Spencer novels, the Jesse Soane series. He has a whole bunch. You probably know the name, Robert B. Parker. This is the last, obviously he was always 2 or 3 books ahead. So this is the last Spencer novel, just came out. Robert Parker did die last year, a great writer. Here's a picture of him in the back, maybe you can see. I haven't read every single one. This is the 39th Spencer. I haven't read all of them, but I did read when the series was first starting, I would say to anyone, if you're going to read any of them, the first 12 are fantastic. They started in the early 70s.
Are those all Spencer? The first
Spencer,
12 were
yeah.
Spencer.
His other series came up in the 80s or 90s.
Did you ever see the Spencer TV show?
Yes, it was really good. Robert Ulrich played him, yes.
Did you think that was fair?
It was good,
fair? Yeah.
Yes. But the thing about the Spencer, particularly the early ones, Robert Parker really redefined the detective novel and the hard-boiled detective novel from the holy trilogy, I'll say, of Dashiell Hammett, Raymond Chandler, and my personal favorite, Ross MacDonald. So he's really the heir to those guys. And he really redefined masculinity, too, for the detective novels, because in the book Spencer, if you read any of them, his girlfriend, Susan Silverman, is a Jewish therapist or something.
Yeah, psychotherapist.
And he ends up he sort of has an adoptive son who gets into ballet, and he has some cops who are gay, and so he's becoming this sort of multi...
yeah, he has a very interesting relationship
and
with Susan.
And of course, his partner's named Hawk, a black guy who's sort of a gun for hire. But the Spencer, they're very entertaining, kind of serious. The early ones are so good. Like I say, he really redefined the genre. So, and he did unfortunately die last year. So the last Spencer novel, well, I should say, Jesse Stone and Spencer are being taken over by other writers. So we have yet to see how they'll be. But this is the last Spencer novel written by Robert B. Parker. It's called Six Killed, just came out. So that is it for this time, and we'll see you next time.